Welcome to the Billable Mom Podcast, led by attorney Cari Rincker, where we discuss working motherhood, but especially geared to professional mothers who are trying to juggle their time. Our time is precious, both at work and at home. We talk time management and productivity hacks, the struggles of being a working parent, and provide a community where other Billable Moms are also trying to calm the chaos 6 minutes at a time. Listen to stories of other working moms, but especially lawyer moms, navigate the waters balancing career and the ever-present demands of motherhood.
Hi, I'm Cari Rincker, and I'm the Billable Mom. I'm excited to have today's conversation with Michelle Coady Carter here in the house. And Michelle, could you just briefly introduce yourself to our listeners to tell us where you are, what you do, and your path to becoming a Billable Mom?
Sure. So my name is Michelle Coady, and I am basically a general practitioner here in Central Illinois. I have an office in Springfield. I practice throughout the state. My practice now is a little bit more specialized. I do mostly adoption, guardianship, and then DCFS litigation. I'm also the public guardian, the public administrator for disabled adults in a number of surrounding counties. I'm actually originally from Central Illinois. I went away to school and ended up coming back home. And I started in a really small general practice firm, did the big law firm thing for a couple of years. And then I had an opportunity that a friend of mine was retiring from practice, and I was able to take over her practice and open my own office, which has what's evolved to where I'm at here today.
And so I met Michelle, I think it was last spring at a conference that talked about, juvenile abuse cases. And I just love that conversation that we had. And since then, I've learned more about your adoption practices and your adoption practice and, your experience with international adoption. And so why don't you just maybe catch our listeners up a little bit about your daughter and your journey there?
Yeah, so it's kind of a crazy circle that's gotten to where I'm at today. And when I started practice, well, actually in law school, I never thought I would be like in the family law arena or doing anything with that. I didn't even take it in law school. And then, once I got into a general practice firm where you have to do a little bit of everything, you're sort of, you have to learn how to do everything. And so I did a few adoptions in the small firm I was at there. And then I went to a civil defense firm that had an attorney that worked there that was also an adoptive parent. And because I was in a general firm and I had done adoptions before, I was the only associate that could help him on adoptions. And so when he did readoptions for international adoptions, he would kind of hand them off to me to finalize them. And because of that, I got connected with a group, a nonprofit group that had orphanages in a couple of different countries. And they invited me to come to one of their fundraisers. And my heart was just really touched. I was already done juvenile law too, and been involved in the juvenile abuse and neglect system. And I just had like a moment during this fundraiser that I can still remember where they're talking about these kids that need families and just thinking to myself, that's me. That's where I want to be someday. And I didn't even have a child at the time. And so I had my son, normal conception, biologically mine, loved being a parent. And then I always had that thought in the back of my mind that I had room for other children. And I really did want to adopt. But so I stayed involved in adoption. That was the way I contributed to that cause. And then I took a mission trip to Haiti toward orphanage. And while I was there, I talked to another family that had hosted kids internationally for a summer program. And we signed up to host a child that was from an orphanage from Colombia, from South America, that following summer. And So not my daughter then, but my daughter now came and stayed with us for a few weeks over the summer. And it was just a program the goal is ultimately to find adoptive families for older children. But it's also to give them an opportunity to see what it's like to actually be in a family environment. And so we hosted her for a couple weeks. She was 12 at the time. And I knew before she even got there that we wanted to go through the adoption process. And so she came in July. She went back after a few weeks. And by October of that year, we were traveling to Colombia to bring her home. So she's 17 now. She'll be 18 in March. The time has flown. But through that process, I decided that I needed to devote more time and more focus to adoption. And so as a result of that, I shifted my practice. I shifted my practice to more part-time and went on as general counsel for a nonprofit adoption agency that did international adoption, and the agency we actually used to adopt my daughter. And I did that, and that opened the doors for doing more specialized practice with DCFS litigation, representing foster parents and families and relatives. And so, yes, my foot is always in the adoption world now.
So my head is spinning. I have so many questions. So for starters, when you had your son, were you in private practice at that time?
I was in that small firm in Central Illinois. It was a practice with 3 other male attorneys and a very small, in Christian County, so right in the heart of Central Illinois. And it was an experience.
How was your first transition after having your son back to the workplace?
Well, my transition was not ideal. It was almost immediate that I was back to work. I remember doing a telephone conference call with him in my lap breastfeeding like a week after I'd had him. I had a pretty difficult pregnancy with him, and so I did have to take a little bit of time off before I had him. And I would not say that I had the best example for firm practice with the attorneys I worked for at the time. And so I felt a lot of pressure to go back to work right away. And sure. I did.
Hindsight is 2020. I mean, if you could roll back time and do it different, what do you think you would have changed?
I think that I would have probably advocated for myself more. And instead of feeling like I had to come in, I would have just asserted, no, this is my time. This is my time to adjust. One of the most difficult things that I had was the issue of breastfeeding. I really wanted to breastfeed. And I had asked when I was there if I could put a lock on my door so I could breastfeed. And the solution was, we'll just go to the bathroom. Well, I didn't want to pump. I used to say breastfeed, but pump. I didn't want to pump in the bathroom. And, court is not very forgiving when you're full and trying to get away. And so that was probably the most difficult thing that I had. And I wish I would have asserted that more and just been like, I'll bring the locksmith in. There's going to be a lock here because I'm going to pump when I'm in my office, and you guys are just going to have to get used to it.
Yeah. It's just so interesting that, going backwards, I think that we all would have advocated for ourselves more. So I have an associate attorney who is presently on maternity leave. Mm-hmm. She is on month 2 of her maternity leave. And I have to tell you, even as an employer who's had 2 children, I am counting down the minutes until I'm going to get her back. But at the same time, life goes on, right? I mean, my law practice has not collapsed without her, right? And I think that as women professionals, we just feel so much pressure on ourselves that like we have to work, everybody is depending on us. But you know what? A few months, we could have given that to ourselves, So
yeah. And that's one of the things that I did too. I had an associate that worked for me for a period of time, and they had struggled to get pregnant. And once she did, I told her, take all the time that you need.
Yeah.
Work from home if you need to work from home while you're pregnant, if you don't feel like coming in. And I assured her that when she went, I asked her, how much time do you want? And it was difficult because, the idea of paid leave for a long period of time is kind of hard to stomach when you are a sole practitioner. But for me, it was really important to make sure that for my own employees, that I've always made it clear that we can get along without you, just communicate. And so that's what I did with her. And so, I still emailed her a couple times while she was on maternity leave because you just have to. But I tried to make sure that I did not interrupt any of that time at all so that she could actually focus on her kiddo.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm curious, then Michelle, when you were going through the process with your now daughter, right, when she was doing that initial visit, how old was your son at the time?
11. They're just a year apart.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, how did you navigate those emotions and topics at that point in time with your son?
Yeah, so that was an interesting process because we did involve him in the decision to adopt and the decision to host. And he was gung-ho about it. And he was super excited. And, and I told him at the beginning, if you're not comfortable with this, we're not going to do it. But just understand, if this child comes for the summer, she's probably going to come back. That's what the plan is. And he was all for it. And when she came home for the summer over hosting, they bonded. He had a connection with her. And that's when his mind changed, that he didn't want us to finalize an adoption. And he had some concerns about sharing time because he had been an only child up until that point. But it's so sweet because he's such a big heart. But his bigger concern was bringing someone of a different ethnic background into a community that's more conservative.
Sure.
And he was afraid that she was going to come here and she wasn't going to be accepted, and he didn't want that. And so we talked through all of that. And at that point, I told him, at this point, you have input, but the size of the family is my decision. And so we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about your concerns. And we talked through it. But, ultimately, I decide what size my family is going to be. And he was accepting of that. And they have the most amazing bond.
Oh,
He's
cool. That's neat.
Big brother. He protects her. They bicker back and forth like siblings.
Is he older than her?
Older.
By 1 year. Okay. I guess
he would have been 13. He would have been, I said 11. He was 13 when she came for hosting.
I know that I mentioned this on previous podcasts, but and I think I told you this, but before I got pregnant with my son, I actually became a licensed foster parent, and then they get to take all the classes. And I remember one of them was about birth order and how important that is, and how that can kind of affect the dynamics. Did you think about that at all? Did you deliberately choose to have an adopted child that was younger than your son, or were you just going to just see what, the universe brought your way?
Yeah. Well, so I don't think that I had a concern about birth order necessarily before going into the adoption process with my daughter. In the agency that we were going through, they had a policy to not disrupt the oldest child. And so to adopt, the child has to be younger than the oldest child in the home. So that was their policy. So we already knew that we had to adopt. And I will tell you that since being more involved in the international adoption process, I 100% agree with that philosophy to not disrupt the birth order placement. And honestly, I think it's sometimes difficult to even place a child in the middle. I think it's better for them to always be the youngest child, just because of safety concerns, as well as just, interrupting that family dynamic that you already have in place, or that child might be used to in their other environment.
Right. Interesting. Michelle, let's take a quick break. Let's hear from our sponsor. And when we return, I want to talk a little bit about the nitty gritty of the international adoption process.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bottorff, SVP of Growth at Lawmatics. Here's everything you need to know about Lawmatics. Ready? We are the #1 CRM for law firms of all sizes. We help you win more business, speed up intake, and boost efficiency. We integrate smoothly with your favorite practice management tools like Clio, Smokeball, and Practice Panther. And get this, 95% of Lawmatics users see an increase in revenue while 91% see an increase in efficiency. Check out Lawmatics at lawmatics.com and mention the Billable Mom during your demo to get 10% off your subscription. That's LAWMATICS.com.
So, Michelle, you're actually the second guest here on this podcast that has adopted internationally. The second one was Krista Hanning. She's actually an attorney in Bloomington. I believe that she was episode 11. Hopefully we can maybe also link to that in the show notes. But as I said in that podcast, I had thought about international adoption or domestic adoption prior to me getting pregnant with my son. And as you know, I'm an attorney. Right. I'm an attorney, and not only am I an attorney, but I am a family law attorney who has actually done adoptions myself. And I got overwhelmed with the process. Like, I got overwhelmed online. I was actually very worried I was going to stumble into a scam. And, I was seeing these big payment schedules and the huge, like 5 figures adoption fees to international agencies. I mean, what advice would you give to a listener right now who's considering international adoption and is having the same thoughts?
It is an overwhelming process, but so is pregnancy, and so is 9 months of a pregnancy if you haven't been a parent and you have to plan all of that. I think it's kind of a similar journey. It's just that when you're looking at international adoption, it's all getting thrown on you at the very beginning. Cost is a big obstacle for a lot of families, but there are so many grants out there that are available to families to kind of curb that cost. When I was with Madison Adoption Associates, and now I'm on the board for Gladney Center for Adoption, we have a lot of families that almost their entire adoption process was covered by grants.
Wow.
That they applied for, either within the agency or outside. And Madison always did a good job of connecting parents with those resources. But then there's also, Facebook groups and other support groups where families get the information about those type of grants. So I always encourage families, if the reason they don't want to go international is because of the cost, is that there are resources available for that. And the adoption process is pretty heavily regulated here in the United States for international adoption. To be an international adoption agency in the U.S., you have to go through the IAMI accreditation. And they require you for an agency to give you an upfront estimate of costs. But when you start looking at those costs and where they're at, it's not all fees going to the agency. Of course, there are some agencies that have some pretty hefty fees, but that's breaking down every cost. So that would be like breaking down every cost you would have for adding a child to your family, like buying a car seat or going to the hospital and your medical bills, So it's kind of similar, but it's broken down for the adoption process. So when you're looking at those fees, like one of the fees that has to be included is just the cost of going to the country to get the child, which for me, I thought, well, I did not consider that to be a cost of adoption. It's just, I'm going someplace. Of course, I'm going to buy a plane ticket.
Right.
So, that part of it, you got to just take baby steps. And if you have a good agency to work with, they can take you through those steps and answer those questions. Your agency really should be your biggest support system as you're going through that, as far as timelines and as far as expense. And when you get to, most agencies have the fees broken out through the process. So, for international adoption, you're looking, our case was extraordinary because I'm super good at paperwork. And so I got through our paperwork, bang, bang, bang. But most families are looking at least a 9-month to a year process for international adoption, just like you'd have for a pregnancy. So, you don't start out painting the nursery the day you found out you're pregnant. So, you start with the baby steps, and you start first. Okay, let's find an agency. Okay, let's do our home study. Okay, let's submit this to USCIS. let's wait to get a match. We're matched, so it's just, if you take it step by step, I think it's less onerous.
Well, so let's just start at that first step about finding an agency, because even that itself felt a little overwhelming. I mean, I don't know if this exists. I guess I'm assuming it exists, that there are some scams. I mean, on there, maybe there's not. Maybe I don't want to have, false rumors there, but it feels a little overwhelming, and you're potentially working with organizations that aren't in the United States. Mm-hmm. And, so what advice would you give to women who are struggling with just that step one, find an agency?
Well, I would lean on things like support groups and Facebook mm-hmm. groups for people that have adopted internationally, and just asking, what agency did you use? Right. What issues have you had with them? To do international adoption, like I said, they have to be accredited through IAMI, which is a government organization. Okay. You're going to find that over the course of the last 10 years, the number of international adoption agencies that are licensed to do international adoption has decreased substantially, because it's very expensive to go through that accreditation process. So there aren't as many agencies to choose from. I would say that if you're worried about a scam where you're going to pay and lose that money, that if that's your biggest concern, I would shift your attention towards a larger agency that has been around a longer period of time. So there are some smaller agencies that have had some issues that have caused them to shut down just because of the expense of international adoption, even, for the agency. So one of those larger agencies that has, a history behind it is probably your best bet.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to your adoption. I mean, talk to me about your transition as a family after your now daughter returned and you went through the adoption process.
So we hosted in July of 2019. We brought her home in November of 2019. COVID hit in March of 2020. So it was quite the roller coaster for us. But I had actually pre-COVID, from a professional standpoint, my goal had been to be a remote office. That's what I really envisioned, which, in Central Illinois wasn't quite a vision in 2019, but mm-hmm. I was really trying to implement things in my office so that I didn't have to be there. I could work wherever I wanted to work from. And that became really important when the idea of potentially adoption came about, because if you adopt internationally, depending on what country you adopt in, you might have to be there for 3 weeks, a month, however long. And so I knew that. I'm like, well, how am I going to keep a practice running if I'm in another country for 3 or 4 weeks? And so I started implementing then systems in place so that I could work remotely. And I would say that was the saving grace for me to be able to actually bond with my daughter when she was home, and still keep a practice going. And then fortunately, with COVID and shifting to Zoom hearings and more people working remotely, it has been such an easy transition to having an office where it's a little bit more acceptable to be remote and to be able to, work from anywhere.
So talk to me a little bit though more about that bonding. I mean, you adopted her as an older child, and so it's a little bit different, right? Because I have 2 children and I've had them both since infants, and so tell me more about how you navigated those waters.
Yeah, so older kids are definitely harder to get adopted. There's a statistic that once a child reaches the age of 2, the odds of being adopted is 5%.
Oh, gosh.
So, these kids that are older and are in care, whether it's in the US or it's internationally, the odds of them having a family is pretty slim. And part of that's because, the idea of creating a family, you have this idea in your head of this cute little baby that you're going to bring home and you're going to mold them into you. And it's harder to imagine that with a preteen. And who wants to put a teenage daughter in their home, voluntarily? But I have always had a heart for older kids from doing juvenile court and being in GAL and just kind of seeing kids slip through the system. And so I felt like I was going in eyes wide open that, yes, I'm going to be bringing this preteen hormone full girl into my home that's going to have trauma. But we're going to deal with it. I know it. I've seen it. It's going to be great. And for hosting, she was a treasure. She was great. She was funny. She was sweet. I mean, we had such a great time. And when she came home, she was still that sweet, funny kid until about November of the following year. And all of that trauma for her just popped up, and it was the hardest year of my life.
Wow. And you were practicing law during all of that, right?
Yeah. COVID, I was, it was online schooling from, I had 2 kids in school that were doing online schooling, one that barely spoke English. I had already been dealing with that issue with the school and providing her with services. And then on top of that, for her, for kids that come from a trauma background, there's this like idea that this family is not going to keep me, so I'm going to leave first. And she was definitely in that mode that she didn't want to be there because she didn't think that we were going to want her to be there. And we kind of described that phase as being giving a wildcat a bath, because that's what it was like having her in the house. But and I think that's where a lot of parents struggle bringing adopted kids from any kind of genre into the home, is that just that trauma and how you react to that. My son had a really good perspective on it, because she wouldn't listen to anything I said. If I said it was white, she said it was black. And I was getting so frustrated, and he said to me, he's like, Mom, you and I have had 13 years to get to know each other. And so that's why we know what you're going to do. And I know what I'm going to do. And we know how to get through this. You guys don't know each other, so you haven't had that chance to do that. I'm like, oh my gosh, out of the mouth of babes, I'm like, yeah. You're right. And so we just fast tracked that process. And I just, I made sure she always knew that you're stuck with me. You're stuck with me, but that's because we care about you, and you're going to be in this family whether you want to or not. That's your choice. And she got through it, and she's such a great kid. She's wonderful. We got through that year. We laugh about it now, about some of the things that happened, but we leaned on our agency for support. I read books. I tried to apply the things that we learned in our adoption training. And I gave myself grace that I made a lot of mistakes. And I told her I made the mistakes too, and acknowledged it to her that I was not a perfect parent. I was a bad parent during parts of this, but gave myself the grace to know that I'm entitled to make a mistake. And we rolled through it.
Yeah. Michelle, I love that. And I remember also learning with my DCFS classes, that if you think about young teenagers or preteen, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds who are having a really hard time getting adopted, I think what really struck home to me is that, we don't just turn 18 and then know how to navigate the world, right? People need ongoing support. And I think that's what happens when children don't end up finding permanent homes in their preteen or teen life. Then at 18, 19, 20 years of age, they don't have they don't have support. And so it has just, I feel what you have done is very profound to her life, especially. Let's take a quick break here from our sponsor. And when we return, Michelle, I'd like to talk to you about work-life balance, something that I struggle with personally. So this episode of the Billable Mom Podcast is brought to you by Rincker Law PLLC, focusing in food, farm, and family. When I'm not a mother juggling two littles, I'm the principal attorney of Rincker Law, where we believe that strong communities have both strong families and a food, fiber, and agriculture system. At Rincker Law, not only do we do family and matrimonial law, but we also work with entrepreneurs and agriculture producers on business, estate, and succession planning. We are a client-focused, results-driven law practice. At Rincker Law, we also support other billable moms, not only here in the workplace at Rincker Law, but also with clients, helping them live their dreams both in business and at home. For more information, visit us at www.rinkerlaw.com. Cari Rincker, Rincker Law, Food, Farm, and Family. So, confession, before I had my son, so pre-kid, I worked a lot. I still work a lot, but I don't think I realized how much I worked until I had children, and then I can't work like I did before, right? And nor do I want to, right? Because I have children that I want to spend time with. And it has been hard for me to sort of navigate that, right? And to shut off work when I need to shut off work and go be with my family. And so how have you navigated, the work-life balance, so to speak?
Not the best at times. I would say that my ability to balance that has only really gotten to a good point in the last 2 or 3 years. Which is funny because my kids are going to be out of the house soon. And then what am I going to do? But I was kind of the same. And when I was, an associate and didn't have any kids, I would work. And when everybody left the office, that was my time to really bang out the work. And I would stay there till midnight and come home. And I'd feel great that I got so much accomplished. And you can't do that when you've got to pick a kid up from daycare at 6 o'clock. It's like you have to leave to go and get them. Or you can't stay up all night. You're staying up all night because you got a kid crying, not because you're working on a brief. And so I did struggle with that for a long time. And I did a lot of family law too. And those type of clients, they seem to always want to have access to you. And it's only been in the last couple of years that I've learned that my clients don't need to have 24/7 access to me, that it doesn't really move their case along any more quickly because they can reach me on a Saturday afternoon. And so in the last year, I turned off the Outlook notifications on my phone, which was a big step for me because I had this terrible habit I'm not a good sleeper. And so I'd wake up at, 2 o'clock in the morning. And the first thing I did is looked at my phone to see what emails I had. And I'd answer emails at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like, that's insane. It's not necessary. And I found that
the problem is for me is that if I see an email on my phone and then I want to respond to it, and I'm almost tempted, Michelle, I haven't done this. I'm almost tempted to take the email completely off my phone. And that way I just see it on my computer. I just don't know if I can completely survive life, but tell me about that.
I've thought about that, but I have that same hesitation. Like, what if I really need to see it? Yes. So turning the notifications off has helped. I used to adjust my schedule so that I would take Saturday appointments. I take after hour appointments, and I got burned so many times on clients not showing up, like new clients, old clients, that if you tell your clients no, they will actually accept no. And so shocking, right? I finally realized I just have to say no. And just, when they ask, it's like, nope, sorry. This is the time that I meet with clients. And I, with trying to shift towards more of an virtual practice, I changed my new client consults. I do free consults. It's limited to 15 minutes because I figured that's about the amount of time I need to know if I can help you or not. And it's no cost to them. And I only do it via Zoom. Sometimes I'll do it on the telephone, but I don't do any in-person new client consults. And I've had some pushback from potential new clients that are like, well, we want to meet with you in person. I'm like, well, that's fine, but then it's going to be an hour and I'm going to charge you, but I'm happy to accommodate that. And I was kind of afraid that wasn't going to work because like, well, if you're the only one, what about people that don't want to use Zoom? And then I realized that I had so much work coming in that I couldn't do, that it was a way to weed out difficult clients.
It's a nice way to kind of filter them out. These are the clients I'm compatible with. These are the clients I'm not compatible with at this point in my career. So anyway, kudos for you. I know we're running out of time. I wish I could talk to you all day. Michelle, I'm curious, along the way, are there any products, software, programs, books, podcasts, anything that has been especially helpful to you as a working mother?
I would say that switching to a legal software management program that worked for me helped a lot. I'm a terrible biller. I have always been a terrible biller. I've always been bad at capturing my time. And so I switched to Smokeball for my law firm software management that has a passive time capture on it. That has made my life so much easier. I don't have to worry about doing a time entry for every single email that I had during the day. I don't have to worry about getting a text message from a client that's not billed. I mean, it has been a life. It's expensive because you have to pay per user, but I have saved, I've made more money off of it because I've captured my billable time.
Yeah. Liz Noren, who was also on an earlier episode, I think that she uses Practice Master, but she also, I think, has some automations that are synced in there with email and things. So yeah, that sounds fantastic. So Michelle, how can our listeners contact you?
So my website is coady-law.com. You can actually, for potential clients, you can schedule directly from there. You don't even have to talk to me because it's automated.
Love it.
And I have an office here in Springfield, and we're on Facebook, so you can get a hold of us in any of those areas.
Well, wonderful. Michelle, thank you so much for coming to the podcast today. I loved our conversation.
You too.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Billable Mom. At The Billable Mom, we don't pretend to have the answers, but instead have all the questions. Please find us on social media and join the conversation at The Billable Mom on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter X, Pinterest, and YouTube. We also have a Facebook group where like-minded billable moms find solidarity and provide a resource to one another. You can learn more about the Billable Mom and our picks for juggling work and motherhood at www.thebillablemom.com. You can also connect with Cari Rincker directly on social media at Cari Rincker. Until next time, let's calm the chaos 6 minutes at a time.